Educação indígena. A educação na aldeia indígena começa desde a primeira idade. Não segue os padrões de sala de aula. É um aprender sem pressa na solidariedade. Aprende que a agitação da formiga e o canto do sapo indicam que a chuva vem aí. Aprende a apreciar desde pequeno um bom peixe assado com vinho de açaí. Aprende que na arte de pescar só se pesca o que vai precisar. E a calma é importante para a flecha no peixe acertar. Aprende com os mais velhos nossa memória viva, com os espíritos conversar e deles a permissão receber para na mata entrar.
Eu não tinha porra nenhuma pra fazer lá. Quer dizer, por que será que moro com a minha ex-namorada, sua nova namorada e a ex-namorada dela? Como é que alguém pode se sentir bem assim? Eu poderia estar escrevendo essa história de uma cela de cadeia. Engraçado, né? Ted e Alice, antes da minha partida, disseram: nada é tão ruim que não possa piorar ele. Eu não sabia mais o que fazer. Peguei um voo sim, eu fiz isso. Pra Portland. E a Julie e a Cris me buscaram no aeroporto. Eu estava muito doidona no avião.
Encontrei ela ali, hoje de manhã, de barriga para cima. Revelou Dona Elodia, indicando um ponto na praia onde se juntava o lixo que o mar trazia ou desenterrava. Troncos, sacolas plásticas, garrafas. Envenenada? Acho que sim. O que fizeram com ela? Enterraram? Dona Elodia fez que sim com a cabeça e disse: meus netos. Lá em cima, no cemitério? Não, aqui mesmo na praia. Muitos cães do povoado morriam envenenados. Havia quem dissesse que eram mortos de propósito, mas Damares não podia acreditar que existissem pessoas capazes de fazer algo assim e achava que os cachorros comiam por engano as iscas com veneno deixadas para os ratos, ou comiam os ratos, que por estarem envenenados eram caçados com facilidade. Sinto muito, disse Damares.
O imenso moedor está triturando animais mortos recolhidos nas estradas. Tanto o barulho do motor quanto dos ossos sendo esmagados ricocheteiam nas paredes altas do galpão. A mistura de som e fedor enfurece os sentidos. Edgar Wilson deixa o carrinho no lugar delimitado por um retângulo pintado no chão e sobe os degraus de uma escadinha de alumínio que dá acesso à caçamba do moedor, de onde é possível ver o lado de dentro. Consegue ver o que é? Grita um funcionário afastando o protetor auditivo. Não estou vendo nada, grita de volta Edgar Wilson. Desde cedo tá assim, agarrando. Mas não estou vendo nada.
Sobre o autoritarismo brasileiro. Lilia Moritz Schwartz. Demorei aqui Escravidão e racismo. No Brasil, o sistema escravocrata transformou-se num modelo tão enraizado que acabou se convertendo numa linguagem com graves consequências. Graçou por aqui, do século XVI ao XIX, uma escandalosa injustiça amparada pela artimanha da legalidade. Como não havia nada em nossa legislação que vetasse ou regulasse tal sistema, ele se espraiou por todo o país, entrando firme nos costumes da terra. Imperou no nosso território uma grande bastardia jurídica, a total falta de direitos de alguns ante a imensa concentração de poderes nas mãos de outros. Fim.
Se alguém for um espírito guardião, mandado pela primeira vez para habitar um hospedeiro que veio ao mundo em Umoniá, uma cidade na terra dos grandes pais, a primeira coisa a surpreender o espírito seria a imensidão da terra. Quando o espírito guardião desce, com o corpo reencarnado do novo hospedeiro em direção à terra, o que se revela ao olho é assombroso. Subitamente, como se alguma cortina primordial fosse aberta, estamos expostos a uma extensão de vegetação verde e luxuriante.
Quando retirei a faca da mala de roupas, embrulhada em um pedaço de tecido antigo e encardido, com nódoas escuras e um nó no meio, tinha pouco mais de 7 anos. Minha irmã, Belonísia, que estava comigo, era mais nova há 1 ano. Pouco antes daquele evento, estávamos no terreiro da casa antiga brincando com bonecas feitas de espiga de milho colhidas na semana anterior. Aproveitávamos as palhas que já amarelavam para vestir feito roupas nos sabugos. Falávamos que as bonecas eram as nossas filhas, filhas de Bibiana e Belonísia.
Um apartamento em Urano. Em termos biológicos, afirmar que são necessários um homem e uma mulher para levar a cabo um processo de reprodução sexual é tão ridículo quanto eram, em outros tempos, as afirmações de que a reprodução só aconteceria entre 2 corpos que partilhassem a mesma religião, o mesmo sangue, a mesma cor de pele ou o mesmo status social.
Da mesma maneira que, enquanto estamos presos, não cremos na vida livre, que não podemos esquecer. Uma vez soltos, esquecemos a coerência interna da vida na prisão, de cuja realidade, no entanto, não duvidamos. Hoje sei que saí, venho saindo da prisão como quem sai de um sonho. Ao passo que, enquanto preso, eu julgava que Santo Amaro, o solar da fossa e a TV Record é que tinham sido um sonho do qual não era possível sair.
Às vezes você fazia um pensamento e morava nele, afastava-se. Construiu uma casa assim, longínqua, dentro de mim. Era esse o seu modo de lidar com as coisas. Hoje, prefiro pensar que você partiu para regressar a mim e não queria apenas a sua ausência como legado. Eu queria um tipo de presença. ainda que dolorida e triste. E apesar de tudo, nesta casa, nesse apartamento, você será sempre o corpo que não vai parar de morrer. Será sempre o pai que se recusa a partir.
Quando o menino tinha 4 anos, ele perguntou ao pai por que as pessoas precisavam dormir. O pai respondeu: para que Deus conseguisse desfuder tudo que eles fuderam. Quando o menino tinha 12, ele perguntou à mãe por que o pai tinha ido embora de casa. A mãe disse: para poder fuder com tudo que passar pela frente. Quando o menino tinha 13, ele quis saber por que o pai tinha voltado para casa. A mãe respondeu: eu tenho 41, eu não estou afim de ficar procurando alguém para fuder. Aos 14, quando os palavrões pareciam jorrar da boca dos amigos feito água num cano furado, a palavra foda não exercia nenhum fascínio sobre o garoto. Nenhum pingo.
Firme, não suporto o chão de seus fundamentos. Tô de saco cheio de chamar tua imprudência de lei. Cada noite conto meus irmãos, e pela manhã, quando alguns não sobrevivem para serem contados, conto as covas que deixaram. Estendo a mão ao povo preto e toco apenas o ar, seu truque de mestre, América. Ora ele respira, ora não. Abra cadáver, macumba para turista, feitiço que alega não praticar. Dá logo uma pistola ao meu primo para fazer o trampo por vocês. Eu tentei, gente branca. Tentei, branquelos, mas passaram o funeral do meu mano fazendo planos para um cafezinho, falando alto demais ao lado de seus ossos.
Ama, está andando pelo passeio do canal que divide a cidade. Algumas barcaças navegando lentamente nas primeiras horas da manhã. À esquerda está a passarela de inspiração náutica com tábuas estilo convés e torres tipo mastros. À direita está a curva do rio que se volta para o leste depois da ponte Waterloo, em direção ao dono de Catedral St. Paul. Ela sente o sol começar a se erguer. No ar, ainda uma brisa antes de a cidade ficar entupida de calor e fumaça. Uma violonista toca alguma coisa devidamente inspiradora mais adiante no passeio. A peça de Ama, a última amazona do reino de Daomé, estreia no Teatro Nacional essa noite.
Chegou um ponto em que os habitantes de Marte não podiam mais negar o aquecimento do seu planeta ou a escala da destruição que estava por vir. Em uma última tentativa desesperada de preservar sua civilização, eles construíram vastos canais conectando os polos do planeta à grande extensão de terra arrasada que cobriu o resto da superfície. O degelo anual das camadas de gelo polares produziria a água necessária para o cultivo de alimentos suficiente para a sobrevivência de pelo menos mais uma geração.
Educação indígena. A educação na aldeia indígena começa desde a primeira idade. Não segue os padrões de sala de aula. É um aprender sem pressa na solidariedade. Aprende que a agitação da formiga e o canto do sapo indicam que a chuva vem aí. Aprende a apreciar desde pequeno um bom peixe assado com vinho de açaí. Aprende que na arte de pescar só se pesca o que vai precisar. E a calma é importante para a flecha no peixe acertar. Aprende com os mais velhos, nossa memória viva, com os espíritos conversar e deles a permissão receber para na mata entrar.
Eu não tinha porra nenhuma pra fazer lá. Quer dizer, por que será que moro com a minha ex-namorada, sua nova namorada e a ex-namorada dela? Como é que alguém pode se sentir bem assim? Eu poderia estar escrevendo essa história de uma cela de cadeia. Engraçado, né? Ted e Alice, antes da minha partida, disseram: nada é tão ruim que não possa piorar ele. Eu não sabia mais o que fazer. Peguei um voo sim, eu fiz isso. Pra Portland. E a Julie e a Cris me buscaram no aeroporto. Eu estava muito doidona no avião.
Encontrei ela ali, hoje de manhã, de barriga para cima. Revelou Dona Elodia, indicando um ponto na praia onde se juntava o lixo que o mar trazia ou desenterrava. Troncos, sacolas plásticas, garrafas. Envenenada? Acho que sim. O que fizeram com ela? Enterraram? Dona Elodia fez que sim com a cabeça e disse: meus netos. Lá em cima, no cemitério? Não, aqui mesmo na praia. Muitos cães do povoado morriam envenenados. Havia quem dissesse que eram mortos de propósito, mas Damares não podia acreditar que existissem pessoas capazes de fazer algo assim e achava que os cachorros comiam por engano as iscas com veneno deixadas para os ratos, ou comiam os ratos, que por estarem envenenados eram caçados com facilidade. Sinto muito, disse Damares.
O imenso moedor está triturando animais mortos recolhidos nas estradas. Tanto o barulho do motor quanto dos ossos sendo esmagados ricocheteiam nas paredes altas do galpão. A mistura de som e fedor enfurece os sentidos. Edgar Wilson deixa o carrinho no lugar delimitado por um retângulo pintado no chão e sobe os degraus de uma escadinha de alumínio que dá acesso à caçamba do moedor, de onde é possível ver o lado de dentro. Consegue ver o que é? Grita um funcionário afastando o protetor auditivo. Não estou vendo nada, grita de volta Edgar Wilson. Desde cedo tá assim, agarrando. Mas não estou vendo nada.
Sobre o autoritarismo brasileiro. Lilia Moritz Schwartz. Demorei aqui a... Escravidão e racismo. No Brasil, o sistema escravocrata transformou-se num modelo tão enraizado que acabou se convertendo numa linguagem com graves consequências. Graçou por aqui, do século XVI ao XIX, uma escandalosa injustiça amparada pela artimanha da legalidade. Como não havia nada em nossa legislação que vetasse ou regulasse tal sistema, ele se espraiou por todo o país, entrando firme nos costumes da terra. Imperou no nosso território uma grande bastardia jurídica, a total falta de direitos de alguns ante a imensa concentração de poderes nas mãos de outros. Fim.
Se alguém for um espírito guardião, mandado pela primeira vez para habitar um hospedeiro que veio ao mundo em Umoniá, uma cidade na terra dos grandes pais, a primeira coisa a surpreender o espírito seria a imensidão da terra. Quando o espírito guardião desce, com o corpo reencarnado do novo hospedeiro em direção à terra, o que se revela ao olho é assombroso. Subitamente, como se alguma cortina primordial fosse aberta, estamos expostos a uma extensão de vegetação verde e luxuriante.
Quando retirei a faca da mala de roupas, embrulhada em um pedaço de tecido antigo e encardido, com nódoas escuras e um nó no meio, tinha pouco mais de 7 anos. Minha irmã, Belonísia, que estava comigo, era mais nova há 1 ano. Pouco antes daquele evento, estávamos no terreiro da casa antiga brincando com bonecas feitas de espiga de milho colhidas na semana anterior. Aproveitávamos as palhas que já amarelavam para vestir feito roupas nos sabugos. Falávamos que as bonecas eram as nossas filhas, filhas de Bibiana e Belonísia.
Um apartamento em Urano. Em termos biológicos, afirmar que são necessários um homem e uma mulher para levar a cabo um processo de reprodução sexual é tão ridículo quanto eram, em outros tempos, as afirmações de que a reprodução só aconteceria entre 2 corpos que partilhassem a mesma religião, o mesmo sangue, a mesma cor de pele ou o mesmo status social.
Da mesma maneira que, enquanto estamos presos, não cremos na vida livre, que não podemos esquecer. Uma vez soltos, esquecemos a coerência interna da vida na prisão, de cuja realidade, no entanto, não duvidamos. Hoje sei que saí, venho saindo da prisão como quem sai de um sonho. Ao passo que, enquanto preso, eu julgava que Santo Amaro, o solar da fossa, e a TV Record é que tinham sido um sonho do qual não era possível sair.
Às vezes você fazia um pensamento e morava nele, afastava-se. Construiu uma casa assim, longínqua, dentro de mim. Era esse o seu modo de lidar com as coisas. Hoje, prefiro pensar que você partiu para regressar a mim e não queria apenas a sua ausência como legado. Eu queria um tipo de presença, ainda que dolorida e triste. E apesar de tudo, nesta casa, nesse apartamento, você será sempre o corpo que não vai parar de morrer. Será sempre o pai que se recusa a partir.
Quando o menino tinha 4 anos, ele perguntou ao pai, por que as pessoas precisavam dormir? O pai respondeu, para que Deus conseguisse desfuder tudo que eles fuderam. Quando o menino tinha 12, ele perguntou à mãe, por que o pai tinha ido embora de casa? A mãe disse, para poder fuder com tudo que passar pela frente. Quando o menino tinha 13, ele quis saber por que o pai tinha voltado para casa. A mãe respondeu, eu tenho 41, eu não estou afim de ficar procurando alguém para fuder. Aos 14, quando os palavrões pareciam jorrar da boca dos amigos feito água num cano furado, a palavra foda não exercia nenhum fascínio sobre o garoto. Nenhum pingo.
Firme, não suporto o chão de seus fundamentos. Tô de saco cheio de chamar tua imprudência de lei. Cada noite conto meus irmãos. E pela manhã, quando alguns não sobrevivem para serem contados, conto as covas que deixaram. Estendo a mão ao povo preto e toco apenas o ar, seu truque de mestre, América. Ora ele respira, ora não. Abra cadáver, macumba para turista, feitiço que alega não praticar. Dá logo uma pistola ao meu primo para fazer o trampo por vocês. Eu tentei, gente branca. Tentei, branquelos, mas passaram o funeral do meu mano fazendo planos para um cafezinho, falando alto demais ao lado de seus ossos.
sou Pedro Libânio.
I'm Pedro Libanho. I graduated in literature from the University of Campinas, and for 12 years I've been a teacher of literature and a writer. I came to live in Paraty because I saw in the city a place for inspiration in this town, this small town of Paraty, and a town for contact with nature in a world where there's so much inequality. This inequality is here in Paraty as well, but where I could live, processes that are closer to people, be closer to people in small things of daily life, riding my bicycle, meet people, and especially reading and writing closer, because I think that here we lose somewhat our rituals and the superficialities of the big city. Something that called my attention with education for literature are the people's life stories. The stories of the caiçaras and the coastline are beautiful stories. So Paraty is a town where, because it's closed, the highway, it was lost in time. It was like almost like a ghost town for decades. If we can write this in the life stories of these people, I think it's a work of literature, and for humankind, it's reached this limit of civilization that nobody can stand it anymore. And literature can be a way of recombining this tradition and offer to people.
One of
the things that makes children in the kids believe in the teachers is the fact that we are that beyond teaching. And I believe that this is extremely important, and it makes kids trust me when they see me. It's almost in a parallel world, but a lot of different nuances and intertwinings, which is the fact that I write and publish, especially on social networks, which is where we have contact with people. But now in paper, it's important for me to be writing on paper here as well, so kids can trust me that teach literature, but also writes. So living what I teach, and the result of this is great. I think that Flip, it brings us inspiration because you see the authors in flesh and blood and going on outings on the boats and walking around in the streets. But I like the between the words, we're going to have Flip in 2021, but who is here practicing literature between the two flips between 2020 and 2021? It's the Fuzuê Literário, the local people who are collectively, we had to be united in participating in these two collectives, because alone you fall, and you find that people are truly interested in literature in this town of Paraty. The Ministry of Tourism and the Casa Azul Association present the 18th Paraty International Literary Festival with tax incentives from a federal law, Vale Culture, and with official sponsorship from the Itaú Bank, with support of the municipal government of Paraty, Pinheiro Neto attorneys, and you all. It's organized by the Casa Azul Association, the Special Secretariat for Culture under the Ministry of Tourism, the Brazilian federal government.
Esta mesa é ao vivo.
This roundtable is live, and questions for the authors can be sent in throughout the broadcast through the chat box on YouTube. At the end of the talk, some of them will be addressed directly to the guest authors. So we wish you all a wonderful Flip. Hello, good evening. My name is Schneider Carpeggiani. I'm from Pernambuco, and it's a huge pleasure to be here as the moderator for the last session of Flip on Friday. I want to thank the producers of the uh, event for the invitation. I have the good fortune to be with two authors whose work I greatly admire. Ana Paula Maia, who I've chaired a session with her once, and I've followed her work for some time already. Ana Paula Maia, she won 2 consecutive years the São Paulo Literary Award for like Bury Your Dead, and and Here on Earth and Under the Ground, and she's doing the script for the Zalma series. And Pilar Quintana, who is an author who just recently we were talking in the backstage before the session began, and I was saying this because of everything that's happening with the pandemic. I was somewhat stopped reading fiction. I was reading nonfiction, reading The Bitch, which just released by Intrinsic at the publishing house. So it's a way of reuniting with literature and fiction. It's a pleasure to be in this roundtable. Before we begin, I'd like to make a brief announcement. During the roundtable, if you hear sounds and an ambulance behind me, it's normal. I think that we're living a moment in Brazil in which, as Bacurau, the movie said, we're being attacked. So the ambulance sounds, they become a daily routine for us every day. Ambulances racing back and forth. I'd like to open up the discussion talking and beginning with this theme of slaughtered animals, animals which in a sense traverses both authors' work. Before the first question for Ana Paula Maia, I would like to read just a beginning of her book. It's a fabulous book called Esther Marcial, called Literature and Animality. I think it is an excerpt which expounds on the work that the two authors use in different ways. Animals, from human views, are living beings and signs of what escapes our understanding, radically other, but also our neighbors, distant and similar to us. They fascinated us and they frighten us and challenge our reason. They're feared, subjugated, loved, marginalized, admired, confined, eaten, tortured, classified, humanized, and they don't paradoxically let themselves, uh, they don't capitulate their radical authority. Ana Paula, good evening. Hello, Schneider. The animals uh, uh, sign you have both in the book's title in slaughtered animals. It's an epigraph of a book where you state, the epigraph says the following: no human should reach the president of Brazil if they don't know how to understand pigs. In their last book, Bury Your Dead, we have a guidebook there, two different characters. One of them is well known, if people know fiction, which is Edgar Wilson, which are people who uh, pick up dead animals, like rendering services. They pick up dead animals on the highways. The book, it they have people who carry animals' bodies, but oftentimes because of their work, they're able to carry the human bodies to bury the humans. It's a huge problem. I'd like for you to comment a little bit about this animal's fate that traverses this fixation on the image, the fate of animals. First of all, I would like to say good evening to everyone who is here participating in this roundtable. It is a huge pleasure to be here with Pilar Quintana, with you, Schneider, and thank the organizers, Casa, rather, Flip, for the invitation. It's a huge pleasure to be. It's my first Flip. I'd never participated in Flip before. I'm participating in the 18th. So it's come of age. It come of age at 18 years. So it's a specific moment that we're experiencing now in the world, and experiencing this collectively, because we have a collective feeling. And I here in Curitiba, Pilar is in Bogota, and we're all experiencing and living and breathing this moment in a very similar way. And it's something which affects all of us. And I believe that there are some elements that I perceived as I wrote, which in a sense, connects everyone. Everyone is, there's a great proximity between people. And I think there are things in my writing that the rural space, it's somewhat more of isolation, the rural space, far from the big cities and the animals. I think that the animals, the animal behavior, even though you may not have a domestic animal, like a pet, or maybe a bird flying in the sky, the movement of a buzzard or a vulture, animals along the highway, the cattle that are grazing. And I wasn't raised in the countryside, but I have a great fascination for the countryside. I think that this nature, crude, raw nature, real nature, when you're in more rural spaces, I think that there's a code there, which if you know how to observe, you can communicate a lot and teach a lot to you. And I think it's extremely interesting for people who have this more direct relationship with the countryside, a simpler life. And watching the video, this teacher who lives in Parachi, he was talking precisely about this, that he left the big city and he went to a small town where he could connect more with this space. And I believe with the animals, with the nature, with the land, with the sea, the sand, the beach. And I think that in books in general, the universe that I create, that I've been building, it's in this space where the animals become the protagonists, the main characters, and humanize the presence of animals is very intense. Uh, Humans become bestialized vis-a-vis the animals, and we perceive the integration of the two, because when we think that we eat animals, in a sense, if you eat beef, you eat their flesh and blood, you become their likeness. And if you eat the flesh and blood, you become closer, and you're a likeness of them in urban spaces. And when I began to write literature and writing to go to a rural space, it's where I'm able to have the space to argue better these relationships, this human relationship between humans and animals. And not only this, but contemplating nature as well, with the sky, the sea, the rivers. My books always have a river crossing the story. There's something, some smell in the air. Bury your dead. There's a quarry which is being broken down and it's being destroyed. So the nature is lapidated in a sense, and this affects that space and how people react in that place and interact. So I believe that it's a set of elements that the animals have gained this protagonist role. I don't know why I have so much fascination for animals, wild animals, where I had one dog in a story and from cockfights. There was a cockfight in one of my stories, but they were dueling. It was a bloody fight between and the vultures in Bury Your Dead, which direct people to where the corpses are located. So I believe in this integration between humans and animals, which we see more in the places farther away from cities. I think it was something that I built without really realizing it at first, and it charmed me and seduced me with instigating my thoughts and involving the readers with these elements as well. And there's a scene at the beginning, right at the beginning of Bury Your Dead, which is frightening. There's a incinerating the animals, where it's a rendering plant. They're incinerating and grinding mare, and half of the mare, and the owner comes and says, has a relationship. It was his pet mare. I want to take the mare home because I want to hold a wake for my mare, and reconnecting with this emotional relationship with the mare, which half the body has already been ground in this rendering plant. Thank you very much, Ana Paula and Pilar. I spoke a little bit about at the beginning of the roundtable of the importance for me to read The Bitch now in this process in recent months. And The Bitch is a book where it reminded me of a poet, a Portuguese poet called Campus Filho, who says that if you fight with an animal, you lose the fight. The bitch, first, it's a woman. She is 40 years old. She can't have children. Her name was Damaris, and she sees a dog that was poisoned, died from poisoning with the puppies. She adopts one of the puppies and takes it home. And precisely when she decides to adopt the puppy, she receives a recommendation from the owner, like a threat. It's a female. And in this book, Pilar talks about this relationship of affection, which you could consider the mother and child, all relations, and emotional relations of affection. The affect can also be violent, as if we were always had to be Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde almost. Why using these elements of the bitch for this book?
Schneider, good evening. Ana Paula, great to be here with you tonight. I am sorry we're not in person, but maybe we will meet one day. Well, I write a novel about a woman and her dog, and as Schneider mentioned, she can't have children and she decides to adopt a dog, a puppy. And I thought that this was a topic that was not really that present in Colombian or Latin American literature or in anything that I had read outside of Colombia or Latin America. So it made me think. And actually, when I was living with my parents and my grandparents, well, animals didn't have the relationship they have today with people. When I was a little girl, the dogs or pets in house were outside in the garden, and there was a shift, a change, a very quick change in which animals now are part of the family. This was not the case when I was a little girl. When I was a little girl, dogs were there to bark and to protect your property, and cats were there to eat mice. But now there has been a change, a shift, and now dogs and cats are part of the family. And now you throw birthday parties for your dogs, and if your pet passes away, you go to the cemetery and there is a wake, a funeral. So I believe that now maybe it's worth exploring the relationship between a dog, a pet, and its master, a female master, from a literary perspective. And I think I lived in the Colombian Pacific area, which is an isolated area at the sea, but it is not the Caribbean. It is a coastline with less tourism. It is an area that is in the jungle. It is very wild. And I would say it's even more difficult. It's hostile. It's the Amazon forest. And I lived there 9 years in a cabin in this very environment, jungle environment. And I met a woman that had been only to the second form in the primary school, and the natives of the coast ate every single animal. I mean, every single animal, like, I mean, the jungle animals, and we had this cute, very sweet animals, and they ate everything. They ate monkeys. And I said, why don't you eat monkeys? And she said, no. And this was a woman that had never studied anything about the species, the theories of Darwin. And she said, well, if you notice, monkeys are human beings. You look at them in the eyes and you see their hands and how they behave. They are human beings. And this had to do with I had read Desmond Morris, and his book is The Naked Monkey. And I don't know how these books would have been read. I read these books a long time ago, how they would have been read. And they talk about the human being as an animal. And these books study human behavior in the perspective that somebody might have when they are studying an animal. So we think that we're human beings, but in our rational being, we're animals. And that is what has permeated my literature from the first novel and what I wrote yesterday. And I have always talked about the animal nature of human beings, as I was saying about the sloth that they ate, the natives of the coastline. And when we talk about sexual desire, I used to think about that. We get naked, we get rid of our masks, and we follow our basic instincts. We, as human beings at this moment, we are transformed in a pure animal. Rationality in the sexual act is lost and instinct arises. And this topic is very interesting. And when I was 39, I wanted to have a child, and this desire that had nothing to do with rational thoughts, that was overwhelming. I wanted to have a baby in my bottom and then to give birth to a baby and then to breastfeed a baby and then feel that love for this baby. That I remember somebody said something, and if somebody threatened my baby, I could kill that person that threatened my baby. And I was serious. And this person went back and saw in my eyes that I was serious. I was a mother and that I was going to kill anybody that could hurt my baby. And it was not rational at all. It was an animal. So motherhood made me explore the desire to become a mother and all the process of motherhood as an instinct, as an animal basic instinct. So that's it. Just to explain how the animal content permeates my work.
Pilar, para quem lê o teu livro, é o momento, para quem lê o teu livro e para quem vê a própria reação dos personagens em relação ao animal, quando eles percebem que o animal ele também é um ser desejante, a cadela é um ser desejante, tanto que a relação que ela tem com os filhos de abandono, isso choca completamente os personagens, né? Isso traz um desequilíbrio para a cena. Eu queria que tu comentasse rapidinho, Pilar, o que tu achasse, porque assim, em português, o título do livro Cachorra, ele tem uma dualidade. Cachorra, ele também pode ser um xingamento, uma forma de tratar, mas tem uma dualidade. Em inglês foi bitch. Bitch, ela é uma palavra que ela é muito enfática no que ela quer dizer. O que foi que tu achaste da tradução desse termo para o inglês? Do teu livro para o inglês?
Well, I believe that the female dog was the working title in Spanish, and that was the working title because this novel was about a dog, a female dog, but I always thought that the publisher would say, no, that's a bad title, let's change it. But I kept on working with this working title, and even before handing the title to the publisher, and a friend told the publisher that I was writing a book called The Bitch, and he loved it. And when I handed the book to the publisher, and a lot of people, when I published the book in Colombia, people said, I don't want to read this book. Or they felt a negative thing towards the book. Why the bitch? Well, because my God, it's about a dog. And that's why, oh, okay. And some thought that they were attracted by the book because it was called The Bitch, and they thought that it was something else. They thought it wasn't about a dog, but it is about a dog. It's a hairy dog. And the thing is that I guess that publishers in English wanted exactly the same effect the title had in Spanish, which is a title that for better or worse, it creates an impact. And I believe that they were, maybe bitch is the translation of the word female dog, but the word bitch has lost its original meaning, which is female dog. And nobody at home will call the female dog my bitch because it has a different meaning. It's a bad word now, bitch. So publishers wanted this effect, and they chose this name. And what we said, okay, if we will use this word, the cover has to show that this is about a female dog. So the reader knows that this book is about a dog, a hairy dog, because he will be or she will be let down if it's not a bitch, but a dog.
Ana Paula,
Thank you. Ana Paula, one thing I was thinking about here in these past few times where we are, you know, in our places, because of the pandemic, those who are in quarantine, basically are for months, inside a house, four walls around you, with very restricted transportation, so to speak. So I was thinking about this and bringing this into our conversation, thinking about these places where you, as an author, would take us and how you present yourself when writing. What are the places? These are very difficult places to visit. For instance, there's this scene in Enterre Seus Mortos, where you show this as if it were a mountain, and behind the mountain there's a temple, as if there's no way out of that place. So if you could maybe talk to us a little bit about this, how this relation with this place that we see in your books, what is your feeling in terms of a writer, as an author? How do you inhabit these places? So these are, of course, novel places. These aren't real places. This is the relation I have with fiction. This place, which exists to me, there are, of course, certain characters that live there and that go to this place, and I sort of visit them, see how they live, see what they do, and this place was growing. It started to create in Porcos Abatidos, Gados and Porcos Abatidos. And the second novel, and then you have Carvão Animal. And this is also in a city called Lourdes, also a fake city. And then you have the same river that goes, the Carvão Animal is the same river that goes through the Vale dos Ruminantes, and then Assim na Terra como Embaixo da Terra, and then this is another place where the character will cross into. And we can see that this is a book that will come before of De Gados e Homens. And this is how we go. And then you get all the way through Enterre Seus Mortos. And it is part of this region, part of this place that has gained new hues and limits. This was created due to a need to create a certain geography. So if I have a place that already exists, I can't have everything I want in this place. But since it's a novel place, I can do whatever I want. I can have a coal mine, I can have, a coal production, and geographically, this does not exist. You won't have a coal and charcoal being produced in the same place. So this is something that became more intense, the whole space of the fictional space, so that I could take myself to this place to tell these stories with these different characters that live in that specific territory. So this is a exercise in fiction I do. Not only that, but I visit these places, I revisit these places and characters, and I believe that they exist in the imagination plan or layer. And I always want to visit these places and revisit these places. So these places exist. They exist to me. These characters are there. I can maybe talk about Barra com Tomás. I can go visit Wills, and I can see some of the characters of Enterre Seus Mortos. I can use them. I can revisit them. I can see maybe a character from 2 books ago. This fictional space, this little tiny world, this micro universe allows me to do this. And this is what really gives me pleasure in creating. I don't like to write about my daily life, my routine. My routine is something, uninteresting. I don't like to write about things I see in every corner. The corners might inspire me. For instance, when we talk about, for instance, garbage collectors, of course, I was thinking about the urban spaces and inspired by it. But I like to bring also the rural scenario and bring it in maybe to a more urban space. But I like to, pick and choose some things from the urban space, which is where I inhabit. But I always bring into this fictional world uh, this something that can exist, something that, of course, can exist somewhere on Earth, but not necessarily in Brazil and not necessarily outside Brazil. It's a place, and I have no idea where this place is. And it gives me great pleasure to do this, to go there and write fiction. I can only do fiction in this imaginary place. It's different fiction for literature, it's different from fiction for other things. So the literature fiction, when I sit and write, I need to go to that place. So my writing impulse is there, this very weird place where I'm very connected to and also to my characters. I like to revisit my characters. I have that need. So actually, I do not have this vision of this different place. Sometimes I come here because I go there with Edgar Wilson. I visit it as my character, this very advanced and bold character. So I brought Tomás on one side, and I bring my characters with me. So it's sometimes a uncomfortable space for on one hand because of things that happen there, but in a certain way, death in its more visceral essence, in the bodily idea of death, of what remains, this in a certain way is something that is amazing to me. We see the metaphysical death in literature because all the stories have death. Very rare when we do not talk about death. It is impregnated in missing the person who died, who left us. And that is an impulse, where you have to write a book. But I like the physical part of it, of what this is, of what it means, of what remains. And to me, even though it's sometimes scary, it is a comfortable place also. I don't know why. I don't know why I find it comfortable. However, this is how it works, I guess, because since I was very small, since I was 5 years old, I love terror movies, scary movies. And some people feel comfortable watching scary movies. I am that person. Me too. I feel like I'm being held. I'm being held by someone. I don't know what happens to me. I like terror. I feel comfortable, supported in the scary movies. So I avoid, watching it late at night, but I have this relation. I have a series, written with terror. It's a supernatural drama. So I like the space of this strangeness of the unfoldings of death. And this will, in a certain way, motivate me to write. And more than the solar stories, even though my books will also happen under the sun. It's very arid. It's sun, it's roads, it's horizons. It is dead animals, live animals. I like this dryness. It looks like Mato Grosso do Sul. They have that beautiful, scenario with these, long roads. So you have this horizon that will swallow you. I like that. I like the space that swallows you, and you feel tiny, tiny, tiny when you're driving for 20 minutes and you don't see one single person. So I like the space. It will captivate me. So this, my literature is intuitive in this sense. I guess every author writes intuitively, regardless of having, literature in your life and studying. You create a literary universe that is greater than you. So I was swallowed by what I write. I can't separate it from me, but I am completely delivered to it. I sit there and I watch the stories I write. I go and visit my partners, and these are the characters that I have in my story. So it has become a space, and at the same time, it's a very strange, repulsive. To me, it's a pleasant space. It's like someone who has to, prepare the body to bury it. So I have to organize it. I have to be like the undertaker who will prepare the body to uh, deliver it. So I like to be in this dirty place, but it's aware. I will bring different layers and this moral and I have a different sense of morality in my character, and it's different in my fiction characters, and that is my place. And of course, at the same time, it will cause some discomfort and rest, because it's difficult to be in that same space. I don't write it. I don't write long hours every day because I can't be in that place for too long when you're involved in writing. But at the same time, whatever time I stay there is a pleasure to me. Sometimes I'm impregnated by my book all day long. Sometimes you can go back to your normal life. So this relation that we will try to balance. But this is my place. It is my home. Yes, perfect. Thank you, Ana Paula. Pilar, I was thinking here in reading your book about a sentence I heard you referring to with regards to when you write about the old man and the sea, you did the old lady and the forest or the jungle. This is not an urban book. It is in a forest. It's set in a forest, and the characters. Who are these characters? You have a certain structure, a social structure that you depend on. Your characters are Black, and they live in areas that do not belong to them. And at the same time, they're surrounded by a forest where the forest is also a character with a strong personality. So the writer who wrote this book, looking to the teenager who in the 80s also lived in a Colombia that was taken not by the elements of nature, but taken by narco traffic, people dying, bombs. So, if you could talk a little bit about these two different moments, this teenager who witnessed that period in the life of Colombia, and the woman who wrote this micro universe, this person who is taken by the elements of nature.
Well, I grew up in the city of Cali with the Cali's cartel, with the drug lords, in a city dominated by the mechanics of drug trafficking, in a city in which you turned around and just because of the bars and the movements and the neon lights and the luxury, you knew that there was a drug trafficking city, a very violent city. And in my university years, when I lived in Bogota, I went to university in Bogota, there were bombs everywhere. Pablo Escobar was at war with the government at that time, and they even had to change the constitution, and Pablo Escobar surrendered. And yes, I've talked about this in my work, and I mentioned this, but I believe that the political reality, the reality of war in my country, is always in the background of my stories. And I believe that there are great Colombian authors as Ricardo Silva Romero, Laura Restrepo, that talk about these violence policies in Colombia in their works. And this was so overwhelming, this was so impressive, this was so large that it occupies all the imagery and all the news in Colombia. Violence was everywhere. Now, only now, we can focus on subtle and structural forms of violence, racism, sexism, animal abuse, child abuse. Only now we can focus on these more subtle ways of violence. But in my work, if you notice in The Bitch, we have the military. There they are, the military. They're present in the and we have the dogs that are smelling the bags in the boats. Why? Because they want to see whether there's drug in these bags and these luggage in the suitcases, because it's part of Colombian reality. But my literary topic is not an outward oriented topic, it's domestic, it's internal. My literary subject is the intimate life. So if I focus on structural violence that has been ignored in the past due to the overwhelming and urgent and bloody reality that we had because of war. So I try to name what has not been named. And in a way, my novels and in The Bitch, we always see a gap, a tremendous gap and difference between two social classes, only two, the rich and the poor. And in The Bitch, we have the racial issue. In the Colombian Pacific area is one of the five hotspots of greatest biodiversity in the world and one of the poorest areas in Colombia. It is one of the richest areas and one of the poorest areas. It is one of the most rainy areas in the world. It is one of the most rainy places in the world. And no major city in the Colombian coastline has sewage or drinking water pipes. We're talking about a city that has the largest harbor in Colombia where we export our wealth and we import everything. And this city has no waterworks, no sewage. So, when I was going to talk about The Bitch, I mean, in my novel, it is important to talk about the environment. I have creative writing workshops, and my students, which are students that are trying to write their first literary works, sometimes it looks like their stories take place in a no place, in a no location. And I always tell them, no, no, everything in life takes place somewhere. All things in life take place somewhere. It's warm, it's cold, there are colors, there are sounds. And as a writer that tries to be realistic, that is essential for me, and it has always been important. But when I wrote The Bitch, it was even more important because the Colombian Pacific coast is an forgotten area where you can find all the structural violences, all the unnamed violences that are forgotten in my country. So I had great responsibility to talk about this area that most Colombians ignore, or if they ignore, or they know this area through the news, which are always negative, or through prejudice, or because there is corruption or floods, but they know nothing about the native populations and communities of the Pacific coast. They don't know anything about the Pacific jungle. They don't know anything about these communities. So I had to be very specific. And a third item is that after having lived for 9 years there, I moved back to Bogota, and I missed this place because I knew that I couldn't go back to the jungle, and the place where I had lived was hostile, damp, with a lot of mosquitoes. I had malaria and I had leishmaniasis, but for me, it was paradise. Every single morning I woke up, I opened the door, and I had a library. And I opened the windows, and it was a terrace that was flooded with the view and the ocean. And in the back door, I had the jungle. So it was the most wonderful paradise on earth and the most hostile. And it was intense to live there. And then I went back to the city, in the city where I had to open the tap of the faucet and I had running water. I know how much it takes in the jungle to have water, and I know the what it takes to open the faucet tap and have water. And I believe that writing The Bitch was because I missed this lost life in the Colombian paradise, Colombian Pacific paradise.
Just rounding out to explain to people, Pilar lived for almost a decade in this Pacific coast, actually, where the bitch takes place. I'm going to ask you a question for Ana Paula, which I think that you could also answer this as well. We talk a lot now about we talk a lot about when people talk about Spanish American literature. We talk about magic realism. But I read all of your books. In this book, The Bitch, the books that Ana Paula Maia wrote, we perceive another relationship with the fantastic. And fantastic, it's not a person flying, but fantastic, not understanding the other, that you look at a forest and you fear the forest. You fear a person who supposedly would be different from you. You don't fear a monster, but the monster is the other person. The other, it's an element from nature. It's the wind, a person that you can't understand. It's a drunk woman, like a character in your book. I'd like for you to talk a little bit about this, of this fantastic and this terror which is sustained by human relations.
É para mim ou é para Pilar?
Who is the question for? For both, actually, for both authors, actually. I know if Pilar would like to begin, go ahead, feel free. It can.
Yes, yes. What Schneider was saying was great in the sense that the monster, the other is the monster, and the bitch has a lot of monsters. The ocean is a monster that swallows people and spits people smelling bad, half eaten, rotten, and the jungle swallows beings and gives them back half rotten in decomposition. And we have the monstrosity of our main character's husband, a man that has an axe that chops off a dog's tail, and he's monstrous. And um, this character, I mean, she has always been the main character in The Bitch, has always making an effort. She's always making an effort to be good, to be good. And then she discovers that the monster is not outside, that the monster is within her. So this is the most scary thing because The Bitch talks about that, exactly that. And what I wanted to talk about here is what should happen to me to become the worst version of myself, the most scary thing or the most impossible thing on earth that I could do. I mean, and it is very difficult to name what goes on in The Bitch. I don't want to give any spoilers on the book, but the thing is, what could happen in my life to become a hideous person, to become somebody that I wouldn't recognize as myself? And the answer is in the book. If I had to go through this and this and this and this, maybe yes, I would become that monster. And maybe The Bitch asks us, I mean, and in that sense, it is a terror novel because it's, I mean, it's a question that says, could the monster in me become awakened as the monster in Damaris woke up?
Obrigado, Pilar. Ana Paula, inclusive
Thank you. And this issue, and this was mentioned before we began, the film, The Lighthouse, the script could have been written by you, The Lighthouse, and you're working now in these last two novels. There were elements and poster hole, this fear that you establish with human relations, and this happens in the script. I would like you to talk a little bit about this fear of the other, this fear of the other, not necessarily the monster, but this fear of the stranger and strangeness. The characters in your books establish, and we establish with the characters of your books. Yes, I believe that what defines postergo is the atmosphere that, not that it doesn't exist already, it's the atmospheres that, and it exists for some time. But I believe in recent years we found a path, a way of narrating terror stories. It's a very complex genre. It's a genre that has subgenres, and I believe poster horror defines a subgenre, and this terror that creates a dense atmosphere. And not necessarily, you don't necessarily have a monster. You have a supernatural element. It may or not you're in doubt. Sometimes it's madness of someone's madness that terrifies other people's lives and built in the kind of atmosphere and in the spin-offs and developments in the narrative in the audiovisual or literature. And this, I think this is what defines this issue of post-terror. Post-terror, I began to dwell on post-terror, post-horror, in the place of man. I began to work with post-terror with a greater force. And from that point on, the atmosphere that was built, I think animal charcoal talks about the horror of, I believe that of cattle and men, I found this atmosphere which you don't know exactly, you never know exactly what's happening in the post-terror that happens sometimes, the post-horror. In what we call a supernatural drama. When I began to write the project for TV, I called it a supernatural drama. It has this issue because it is a narrative with a lot of atmosphere, with events that you don't know exactly where the madness is and the supernatural is, or the truth and fantasy. So that's part of post-horror. As these spin-offs happen and the developments, you have this more intense atmosphere and ambience becomes more intense. Of course, you understand which paths to take in this genre that I think it's very rich. As I said, I love horror stories and terror stories and post. I don't like all the subgenres, but I've watched everything, a little bit of everything. And I believe that in recent years, what I'm really happy that in the 2000s, in the late 1990s, 1999s, it gained great strength and with a lot of quality. Terror, I think, it's a genre that converses with us, I say, we human beings, because it works with somber and shadowy our existence and our attitudes and the dark places of human existence. That's why it's so fascinating, because it can shift to supernatural, but it can shift to reality, to concrete reality, to minor details which torture you over the course of the narrative. So it is a poorly closed faucet, dripping in the sink and echoing in the house, and that's haunting. It haunts you. There's minor elements which create, put your nerves on end. Terror, post-terror has this, it knows how to create this kind of atmosphere of anguish. You don't know exactly what's happening in the post-horror. Those characters cause you this feeling of strangeness, but you have empathy for them in some points. So it's a place which I think is very rich and fascinating, and a place that's very difficult to explore in post-horror. And Paula, picking up on this, we just received a question from the audience, which I think that it ties in with what you were saying just now, which is the following. When you talk about this place for horror stories, and a person from internet asked if some of your characters were able to leave this place, if you're able to imagine Edgar Wilson taking his pickup truck and fleeing. Did you ever consider this? Because according to the reader, she commented that they go through their clothes in that place as if they were closed and confined in that place forever, eternally. Your characters escaping from that place. No, I can't imagine that. I think that's their place forever. That's where they live. Edgar Wilson had an experience. In the second book that I wrote, he went to see snow, and there's a scene in a place where there's snow, but it's a place it's close in Latin America itself, maybe up in the mountains, but it was remote place, completely remote, the place where he went. I never removed him from that place where all the stories take place. I don't see any of these characters functioning elsewhere except for that space that was built for them. They helped me to build that place, and I helped them to build that place. I think it was an exchange, a trade-off, and we complete each other in that space where it's possible to be expanded, but still in that place, in this confinement, and where the codes are already established, which is what I was saying before. You create a microcosmos, the codes are established in this microcosmos, the relations are created, they crisscross in that space, and things function there. And this allows me to use metaphors, analogies, or several different situations and questions and issues of what I call this side, which is the side outside the real side of the world, of our palpable world or tangible world. I don't see them, they'll stay there forever. I think, at least. Thank you, Ana Paula. Pilar, we have a question here from the audience for you. It's curious, this question, because it says we only have 5 minutes for this session. Is this the last question? Please let us know. So to keep time, Pilar Quintana, this book, The Bitch, has a series. It forms a set with your narrative. It has an issue that are a lot of things that can be developed. It's like there's some loose ends. A reader is asking you whether you ever considered continuing this book, The Bitch, because the final scene is like there's something about to happen and then you close the curtains. I'd like for you to comment on that. Have you ever considered continuing this book, The Bitch?
La perra,
Well,
llevo escribiendo del universo narrativo de la perra 8
in
años.
the narrative universe of The Bitch started 8 years ago when I left the Colombian Pacific. And we mention a woman that everybody in the village thinks that she killed her husband, and the neighbors that used to live in town, but the husband was in a wheelchair and he got lost. And this is in the novel. So many things that happened in the community, many stories in the characters that I met when I lived there and I developed. Because as Ana Paula mentioned, she goes to a place when she writes. I also go to a place, and these characters are my friends, and I see them, I talk with them, I know when they were born, I know what happened when they were 5, where they studied, which was their first trauma, why they dyed their hair red when they were, I don't know, whatever. So I know everything, and they live with me, they live within me, and they are in this place called the universe of the Colombian Pacific, which I call this way, and I have developed these characters. So I don't know if there would be a second part of The Bitch. I don't know what would happen with Damaris, but we can read in my other books, the books that I wrote after The Bitch, you will see the destiny of other characters. And maybe in other books I will write, you will see what happened with Damaris in The Bitch. I do not think that I will have Damaris as a main character in a novel. I don't think so, no.
E eu acho interessante
I
justamente
think it's interesting precisely the things that you just said with regard to Damaris. And I think that when we read the book, what's interesting is the fact that it's very lean. It allows collaboration by the reader's imagination. We imagine who those people are, how they disappeared in the forest, who was that woman, that drunk woman who adopted the dog. We write these stories for you. I, at least as a reader, ended up writing the stories in my head myself. We're running out of time now. Unfortunately, the time went very quickly. I would like to know whether you'd like to comment on something very briefly for us to finish and round out, Ana Paula, would you like to say something? I would just like to thank you. It was delicious to chat. I'm going to read Pilar's book, to meet you again, at least virtually. It was great. Schneider, it was a huge pleasure. And thank you for this chat. It was very generous, this dialogue that you conducted here, giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about my books here and my work. I want to thank you. Pilar, would you like to say some final words?
También quiero agradecerles a los dos
I
también
would like
por
to thank you too, Ana Paula. I will read your book, definitely. I have been very busy and I couldn't, but I will have time now. Schneider, thank you very much. Fantastic, your questions. What a fantastic talk. And thanks the organizer for having me.
Obrigado a todos. Obrigado a.
Thank you very much for the invitation from Flip, and I hope that next year we will be holding Flip live and in color. Good evening, everyone. It was a huge pleasure to be with you.